This is a quick, maybe 30 to 40 minutes tutorial on understanding how to prepare for an exam. So this is like a quick exam preparation video. I would highly recommend that you go and watch my at least the first 4 videos of the Access series to better prepare for the exams. Because this is not a good way to learn, and you may get some questions for which you may have no clue. So please go and watch that before you watch this, and this will be a good way to review. Usually the questions when they are asked, you will always find yourself in the right place to do the actions that they want you to do. So you don't have to like do too much. So simply they'll ask you a question like they'll say open a table. So they'll say open the table employee list. So you just double click on it and it opens the employee list table, and then you can close it from here. If they ask you to open a database, then you can go to File, and then you can choose to open a database. And from here, if they had questions about saving, you could save it here. A lot of the questions that are asked here could be similar to 2007. I've decided to do a different video for 2010 because the answers might be a little bit different places, and there are some features here which I want to talk about that are not there in 2007. You could get questions like they might say go to the design view of the table. So if the table is already open, you click in the left hand corner in the drop down button, and from here you can go to the design view. So you come to the screen, and when you are in the design view, um, they might ask you to do things, but a lot of times you'll find that you are in the datasheet view and they'll ask you to do something for which you may need to go to the design view. So be careful about that. So I can go to design view, and here they might ask you to change the primary key, which is employee ID, and they might say change it to something else. So if I'm going to make the primary key to be middle name, I click on it, and then I click on the primary key, and it moves the key from employee ID to this. And I can click back on employee ID, and I can click on primary key, and it moves it. They might ask you to insert or delete rows or fields, so I can just click here, and if I click on insert row, it will add one there. And they might say to add a field there, so I could just put whatever name they gave me, and then I have to choose the data type. So the data type could be text, or they might say memo. Sometimes you might get a question that will say change the data type of a field from text to memo, so you need to do it from here. Or they might ask you to change it to date and time or currency. So you need to understand what the data type is, and then you need to come here and change it to hyperlink or whatever it is that they want you to do. And I can click in here and I can delete the row from here. You can also create what is known as a lookup. So say for example for the region, I wanted to create like a drop down button like north, south, east, west. So I click in the drop down button here, and then I go to lookup wizard, and then I choose the option I will type the values that I want, and I'll click next. And then here I type my list. So I can type north, south, east, and then west, and then I can click next, and then I can choose finish. If they ask you to choose it to limit to list, that's what's the button you choose. If they want you to allow multiple values, and that's the option you choose, or else you just hit finish. A lot of time in these things they'll just say use the default, so you may not need to touch any of these values, and just hit finish. And if you wanted to change the list that you just created, in the bottom in the field properties, there is an option for general, and next to it is a lookup. And you see the third row has your list, and you can click on the dots at the end, and it will open this window where you can modify things and make changes to it. Okay, and then there's the general. You might get a question about making something default value. So they'll say make region default value north. So if I click in the default value, and then I can type the word north. And what this does is that all the new records would have that default value automatically, so you do not have to type anything. You may also have a question about adding captions. Captions are things that show up on the column heading. So I could put a caption like region slash whatever, whatever word. So I can change the caption to be different from the field name. And just to show you, I can flip over to the datasheet view, say yes to saving it, and if you look here, there is the region text. And when I click in here, I'll get the drop down button to choose something from, and then the default value is there. Now you could do a lot of changes to things in 2010 right from the datasheet view. Like when I click here, and there is this button here that you can edit the list right from here and also set the default value. So if I want right from here, I can add a new field like the column headings and the fields. So I click in this drop down button, and from here I can choose whether this field will have a number, text, currency, is it going to have a date, or is it going to be a memo or a hyperlink. And you can also create calculated field here because this was not possible in 2007. So then I can choose that, is this a field going to do a calculation for currency where I can like take one field multiply by another field, or is it going to be text? So I'll show you a text option. I'll click here and I say I wanted to add like first name and last name and join them together and put the total here, the combined words there. So I just choose first, then I can double click on this. This part doesn't show up in 2007 either. And then I put the and symbol and then last name, and then I can click OK. And there's a whole lot of functions here that you can look into. I click OK, and there it shows up, and I can now change the name of the field 1 to whatever I want. I can even right click here, and from here itself I can delete a field or rename a field or modify the expression, which is what I just did. So right click and I can delete this field. You may also get a question about saying that the telephone number should be given an input mask so that when you enter a number, the brackets show up automatically. So if I come back to design view and say I'll just put a new field called cell number. The data type for this is text, but you can set the input mask on the bottom, wherein I start the dots, which starts the wizard. I say yes to saving it. And from here, I just use phone number and then hit finish. You could go through the whole next process and see if they ask you to do something there, and you can change that and then just finish it. So what will happen is when you try to enter numbers, the brackets will show up. So I'll come back to the data sheet view, yes to saving, and if I click here, and it puts it there. So these are the options about creating fields and how to modify and have impact on the way it looks. You could also get like options where they might say to create a new table. So they might say create, and now you can create a table from the table design, or just click on table. So they'll tell you which button to press. And you can also use this application parts button. From here you can quickly create like a contacts table which has all the important contacts related fields already created. Alright, so just a few more things to finish in the tables option. So I'm going to double click on any of the tables. Now for the tables, you get lots of options about questions about how to add a new row or a new field or a new record. So you get that question about new record, you just click on the new button, and then you can start typing whatever it is that they want you to type, and you can use the tab key to navigate to the next one field. And right click also works in the exams from what I've seen, so you can also use right clicks. I'm not sure about keyboard shortcuts, so right clicks are a good way to figure things out. You may also get questions about putting things in ascending, which is sorting A to Z or Z to A. So if I click up here and I click A to Z, so now everything will be in alphabetical order. or if I click on John and I click A to Z, it will put that in alphabetical order. Now you can also do these things from the drop down button right here, and you can sort it from here. Z to A, which is the reverse, and they might also ask you to do this in some kind of a numbers. So if I go to, so I've got some products here, so if I click here, they might say sorted from largest to smallest, so that will be doing Z to A rather than A to Z. So now all the large amounts are on the top and the things are up here, and you can always close the table if you don't need it open. You'll also get questions about doing something called filter by selection. So they'll say that only pick Toronto. So if I click on Toronto and there is a selection button here, I can click it and I can choose equals Toronto. Then I only get Toronto there. And I can use the toggle to remove the filter. And you can also do it from the drop down button here, and you can click on select all to remove all, and then just choose the filter you want and then click OK. And you can remove the filter from here, or you can click back here and you can clear the filter from city. And the same way when you have date, you will be able to do date filtering. So let's see if I have a record with date. So like up here, when you click here, you'll be able to sort it by date filters. So you can choose like between last week, this week. So whatever you need, you can actually pick from here. You could also get questions about deleting records. So if I click on this here and I can click in the drop down button and then choose delete record. If it's already highlighted, you can just click on delete and then choose delete record and it will delete things. They could ask you questions about saying go to first record or last record, so you can do it from there. They can ask you questions about finding things. So if I click on find, and they'll say type a word and look for it. So if I say look for a company, the only thing to watch out for, like usually in the exam, all the fields will be properly selected. You just have to type what you are looking for. But the look in is saying current field. You need to make sure you change it to the whole document. Otherwise, in the employee, it's not going to find a company. So now if I click find, it highlights that, and find next, it will highlight the next one. And you can also match the whole field or part of the field, so they'll tell you if they need you to find certain things like that. And the same way you can also do the replace option. If you needed to find and replace something, you can do it from there. You might get a question like where they might highlight some things and they'll say make these columns a required field. So that means people have to put something in this field. They cannot skip it. They cannot leave it empty. And to do that, in the table tools, you'll see a option where you choose to put it required. Okay, so I think I'll have to highlight it like this, and there's required available because order ID is already required. Now in the exams, you might find that it might be hiding because the screen now might not be big enough. Then you may need to click somewhere in the drop down button to find it, and you see there's the table tools. So just be familiar with the wordings here, and a lot of time you can actually figure out how to answer certain questions even if you don't know where things are by reading the question and then thinking where things might be. For this purpose, you need to have a good understanding about these things. You may also get questions about, like they'll say make this column dollar format. So you'll find in the field tools dollar format, so you can do that. I'm not sure if it's under home. No, so you'll have to come to table tools for it, and then you'll see the option for dollar sign. So that will make that whole column dollar currency format. You can resize the columns from here or for the rows, but sometimes they'll tell you to resize it by a certain value. So in the home, in the more button, there is an option called row height. You click it, type the number they give you, and then click OK. So if I type 16, I click OK, all the rows have changed. or they might, if we go to more, there's an option to change the field width. So they used to call it column width before, and it just says field width, and then you can type the number in there, click OK. You can also move the columns wherever you want it. So if I click on it, I point to the heading, left click and hold it, and I can drag it and drop it. I can also freeze this column so that it will stay on the left hand side, and if I have lots of columns, when I scroll across it will always stay there. So if I right click, I can choose to freeze, and you see what happens is it will always stay here, and even if I navigate sideways it will always stay there. Now to move it back, you have to right click and then unfreeze. Now you can point to it and move it, otherwise you cannot move it. And you'll find the freezing options are also under more, freeze and unfreeze. You can also choose to hide fields. So you see that column is hiding. You can also right click and then you can hide. And then if you bring it back, you can go to more, unhide, and then put the check marks back in it. Or you can right click and you'll also see the unhide option. They may also ask you questions about doing subtotals. So like, see if this, I'm clicked in here, or so if I hit the totals button, I'll get this option here on the bottom, the total line, and then from here I can choose to either sum it or average, count. So if I do sum, it just does the summation, and I can remove the totals to remove the totals option. You may get questions about taking your information and moving it to Word or Excel. So if you go to the external data tab, from here you can choose from the export section, choose to export it to Excel and just leave the defaults as it is, or if they ask you to change something, choose those options, click OK, and then at the end close the window, and that's it, the job's done. Or you can export it to Word, so you can do that. There's also options to create emails or mail merge and things. Maybe they might ask you, I haven't seen those options yet. They may ask questions about asking you to have a look at the relationship window. So if that is the case, you go to the database tools and then you click on relationships, and then you'll be able to see all the relationships set up here. If they ask you to set up a relationship, you just add the tables. If you don't see it, you'll have to hit the show table and then add the tables you need, and then drag the fields from one table to the other. And what will happen is you will get this window, and then just click OK. If they ask you to enforce referential integrity or any other things, that you can choose it from here. And to delete the relationship, you can right click on it and hit delete, or click on it one time and then you'll see, or maybe it's a clear button. Yeah, so they use the word clear layout. It used to be a delete, so that's the way you do it. So that's the relationship options. So that finishes the table portion of the Access tutorial exam prep. Now we'll come to the query option. So we'll be talking about queries and then forms and also reports. So that's why it's very important that you go and watch the first 4 videos, so you'll be able to prepared to actually follow along with this tutorial. So the query, you'll get questions like they'll create a simple query. So you go to create and you can go to the query wizard and then simple query, click OK, and just follow the steps. They'll tell you which fields to pick, next, and then give it a name. So you can use the single arrow to choose the single, or double arrow to add all the fields. So that's one option. The other way you may be asked to do a query is they might say use the query design button. So if you click it, then from this button you have to choose which table you want to use. So if I choose customer list and I click add, and you can also add other fields or tables to your query, and then you can start choosing the fields from that list that you want to add to your query. And usually they don't ask you this in that way, but you can do that. Now if I was trying to find some person, so I can click in the first name and I can type John, and then I can run the query. So we'll get a question about that to run it. So if I choose run, then I only find John, and I can click here and go to design view to come to the design view of the query. You may get questions about doing totals, so you'll just click on totals, and then wherever you have the numbers, you can choose to do a sum there. So in this case, I cannot do a sum because last name doesn't have anything to do with it. And you can press it to turn it off. If they ask you questions about saving this query, I can click on the save button here, left hand corner, top, and then I can give it a name, whatever name they want you to give it. I click OK, and the query is created, and that's the symbol of the query, and that's the symbol of the table. So that's the way you create queries. You may also get options. So let me choose a telephone number if they have. I've added it here. Okay. So there is the phone number. You may get questions about just asking you to find a phone number by a certain area code. So I'll just remove this and say I just wanted area code 416. So I just put 416 star. Or you can type like 416 star. That means match the first 3 characters. After that I don't care, and I can choose run. So now it finds me only the 416 area code. And you can do that even in words, like you can put J star, so it will only find everything that starts with J. After that it wouldn't try to match anything. So I can close this query. So if they ask you to run a query, you can just double click on it, or if you were in the design view, then you have to hit the run button here. So I think that pretty much is it in terms of queries. You want to know more, you have a query videos about it. You can go and learn about it in the append queries or update queries or make table queries, which I've talked about in that videos. So I can close this. Now we need to talk about creating forms. So they'll tell you to create a form for, say, table orders. So you just click on it one time, go to the create, and they will tell you to not to use the form wizard sometimes, and sometimes they'll tell you to use the form wizard. But if they just say use the basic form, then you just click on the word form, and that's it. The table's created, and then you can click on save and then give it a name if they ask you to give it a name. But usually they are like really simple steps, and then the form is added, and now they'll start asking you simple questions from the form level. And for that, a lot of time you'll be at the form view here, and then they'll ask you to do something. So they'll say change the color of it to something different. So you'll have to come to from here to layout view, and then in the themes, so you'll see they'll tell you the word themes, so you know what section you're looking for, and as you point to them you'll see they have certain names. So if they say change it to angles, you just click it and it changes it. If they ask you to delete this, you just click on it and hit the delete button on keyboard, and that field is removed. To add a field, I can use the add existing field. So you need to make sure you are in the layout view, and then I can double click and that field is added, and then I can drag it to wherever I want it to be. I'll just close this. They could also ask you questions about adding a button to either delete a record or to add a new record. So to do that, you in the layout view itself, you see there is a button, and in the 2007 you had to do this from the design view, which is from here. You had to go to design view, and then you had to go to the adding the button. But here I can do it from here, and to do this I'm just going to close this, and then I just want to open a simple table. So I'll just click on customer list, create form, and if I want to add a button, I can click on this button option and then drag it here, and then I can choose how and what kind of a button do I want. Do I want a next button, next record button, go to first record, or I can go to record operations, and then I can choose add new record, next. And if they say to use the picture, use that. If they say text, choose that. Whatever they want you to type in there, type it, next. And whatever name they want to give to the button. So I can just say add record button, and I can click finish, and there it is. So I'll just come to the front view, the form view, and there is the add button. Okay, I'll just click save and click OK. So if I come back to layout view, so this is where you go. You can also use the logo button to add a logo. Go to wherever the logos are and double click on it. You can also add a title, so it highlights it, and then I can change it to whatever I want. They could also ask you to add date or time, so you can click it and then read what are they asking you to add. Do they want to include date and time, or just a date, what format, and you just need to choose that. They might ask you questions about adding a sub form, so you need to know what the sub form button looks like. So it's this symbol here. In the exam, the buttons might be a little bigger, but they may not give you the explanation, so you be careful about it. So I'm just going to scroll down a little, and there's already a form added here. So let me close this. I'm just going to quickly use the form wizard to create the table, because you may get a question. So I'll just click on employee list, and I'll click form wizard, and then just choose all the fields, next, and they'll tell you what options to choose for all the things. Otherwise they'll say leave the defaults, next, and then whatever name you need to give it, you give it to it and finish it. Okay. Now they might say that add a subform to the bottom of this, and they'll tell you the subform needs to be added. So you'll have to come to the design view or the layout view. So I'll just do it from design view, and then I'll just scroll down a little, and I'll make some room. In the exam you'll find the rooms already there, and then I'll look for the button to create the subform. You may need to expand it, and there's the button. Click it, and then I'm just going to drag it. Now make sure you drag it in the right place, and now you just click next, because I'm going to use existing tables. Choose whichever table they ask you to choose, and then add all the fields, next, next, and then finish it, and it will add that subform below it. And I can see that when I come to the form view, after below every person I should see the name. Okay, so that's the way the subforms are added. Now you can also add and delete records from the form, so you might get those questions. So you can click on new record here, or you can use this symbol here on the bottom. It's got the yellow color on it with the arrow, and you can use it to navigate. You can also delete records from the form. So everything we can do in the table, you can do it from here. You can do sorting, you can do selections, you can also do finding and replacing. So you may get these type of questions in the form. They may ask you questions where they might say that add like some kind of a label or a text box. So you have to come to the layout view, and there are two buttons to learn here. One is this one, which is called a text box, and then this is a label. So the label is when you just drag it, it just puts like a word on it. That's the label. I'll just hit undo. And the text box is when you drag it, there is like two parts to it. There is the label and also the place where somebody gets to enter something. So those are two different questions that you might guess. I can delete that. So I think that should pretty much finish and answer all the important elements of the form, and I can close it. Say yes to saving it. And remember, you can double click on the forms or the queries or the table. You can also right click on things, and you can choose to delete, rename as you wish. You can do that. And if they ask you to print something when anything's open, you can go to file and then print from here. Now the last thing we need to talk about is the reports, and they'll ask you simple questions about creating a report, modifying the headings or the labels, maybe even put like subtotals and things. So, and also with the reports, we'll also talk about creating labels. That they might ask you questions about that. So to create a report, so say they'll say create a report of the employee list. So I can just click on create this employee list, go to create, and then just click on the report button. So they'll tell you not to use the report wizard, or they'll tell you to use it. So depending on what kind of a question they ask, I can go to report, and my report is created. And then from here I can start adding things. So I'm in the report layout tool, so if I want I can save it, give it a name, and then I can start from the layout tools. I can start making changes, the themes to whatever I want, the colors. I can click on the headings or the titles and change it. I can add page numbers. So a lot of times you'll find that you might be in the report view. Now for you to make those changes, you need to go to the layout view or the design view. You'll find that a lot of these things are easier to manage in the layout view. And then so I can add page numbers, date and times, add a logo which will show up here on the top. You might get a question where there is already a logo there. You just click on it and then you just use the logo button. So I'm just going to add that. I'm going to pause the video for a second. So you might find that the logo is already there, and then you can delete it by hitting the delete button, or you just click on logo and then just go to where the another file is and then double click on the other things and it will change it. Or you can hit delete to delete it. You can also use, so say for example I click here, I can choose to have totals. If there were numbers there, I could do sum. In this case I can only do counting records. I can also click on something and then I can choose to sort them by A to Z, so you will find those options in here too. I can go in the page setup, and then from here I can change it to landscape so that I can occupy more columns in there. And you can also rearrange the things here, so I can just start clicking in there, and if I don't want this I can hit delete and click here and hit delete, and it will just remove that section. Then I can move things. I click here, hold the shift key, click on the bottom, and then I can drag it. And I can even keep holding shift, so I can drag a whole bunch together. So that's the way you can delete or even add things. And you can go to design and you can add existing fields. So you may get questions about that too. I'll just show you what the design view looks like for reports. If I click here, I go to design view. So this is what the design view looks like. So you can also still use the options to add logos and titles from here too, and also some of the other options from here. Okay, so I'll just close this. So yes to saving, and there is your report, and that's the symbol of the report. The last thing I want to talk about is creating labels. So say if I click on customer list, and they'll say create a label with people's names or addresses or whatever. So if I click on create labels, and usually they'll tell you to keep the defaults as it is. So I can click next, and then I can choose, say I want the company name. I can go enter to the next line, add first name, space, last name, and then anything else I wanted I can keep on adding. Next, and then they are asking, do you want to sort it by something, and I can say yeah, sort it by company name. Next, give it whatever name they want to give to the label or the report, click finish, and there it is, A company, B company, and they might ask you to print it, and there's the print button right there. And I can close the print preview, and I can also close this part. So this pretty much covers all the major points. Just be familiar with some of the words. If they ask you questions about creating a navigation form, then just come here and choose what kind of a navigation form they want you to choose. In the database tools, just be familiar with some questions where they might ask you to analyze a table, analyze the performance, or database documenter. So you might see those options in there.
They might ask you a question about saving as a different format, so that you can go to File, Save and Publish, and then you can choose to save it as a 2000 database or a 2003 database, and you can just do a Save As. And you'll find there are other options here to do things. When you go to File, there is an option to compact and repair database, and also encrypt the password. So I think that pretty much covers all the things you need to know. I wish you all the best, and make sure you go and watch my videos, the 4 parts or 5 parts, so you have a better idea of to answer the questions. Thank you for watching. I can delete the row from here. You can also create what is known as a lookup. So say for example, for the region, I wanted to create like a drop down button like north, south, east, west. So I click in the drop down button here, and then I go to lookup wizard, and then I choose the option. I will type the values that I want, and I'll click next, and then here I type my list. So I can type north, south, east, and then west, and then I can click next, and then I can choose finish. If they ask you to choose it to limit to list, that's what's the button you choose. If they want you to allow multiple values, and that's the option you choose, or else you just hit finish. A lot of time in these things they'll just say use the default, so you may not need to touch any of these values, and just hit finish. And if you wanted to change the list that you just created, in the bottom in the field properties, there is an option for general, and next to it is a lookup, and you see the third row has your list, and you can click on the dots at the end, and it will open this window where you can modify things and make changes to it. Okay, and then there's the general. You might get a question about making something default value. So they'll say make region default value north. So if I click in the default value, and then I can type the word north, and what this does is that all the new records will have that default value automatically, so you do not have to type anything. You may also have a question about adding captions. Captions are things that show up on the column heading. So I could put a caption like region slash whatever, whatever word. So I can change the caption to, and from here, if they had questions about saving, you could save it here. A lot of the questions that are asked here could be similar to 2007. I've decided to do a different video for 2010 because the answers might be a little bit different places, and there are some features here which I want to talk about that are not there in 2007. You could get questions like they might say go to the design view of the table. So if the table is already open, you click in the left hand corner in the drop down button, and from here you can go to the design view. So you come to the screen, and when you are in the design view, they might ask you to do things, but a lot of times you'll find that you are in the datasheet view, and they'll ask you to do something for which you may need to go to the design view. So be careful about that. So I can go to design view, and here they might ask you to change the primary key, which is employee ID, and they might say change it to something else. So if I'm going to make the primary key to be middle name, I click on it, and then I click on the primary key, and it moves the key from employee ID to this. And I can click back on employee ID, and I can click on primary key, and it moves it. They might ask you to insert or delete rows or fields, so I can just click here, and if I click on insert row, it will add one there, and they might say to add a field there, so I could just put whatever name they gave me, and then I have to choose the data type. So the data type could be text, or they might say memo. Sometimes you might get a question that will say change the data type of a field from text to memo, so you need to do it from here. Or they might ask you to change it to date and time or currency. So you need to understand what the data type is, and then you need to come here and change it to hyperlink or whatever it is that they want you to do. And I can click in here, and
This is a quick maybe 30 to 40 minutes tutorial on understanding how to prepare for an exam. So this is like a quick exam preparation video. I would highly recommend that you go and watch my at least the first 4 videos of the Access series to better prepare for the exams. Because this is not a good way to learn, and you may get some questions for which you may have no clue. So please go and watch that before you watch this, and this will be a good way to review. Usually the questions when they are asked, you will always find yourself in the right place to do the actions that they want you to do. So you don't have to like do too much. So simply they'll ask you a question like they'll say open a table. So they'll say open the table employee list. So you just double click on it and it opens the employee list table, and then you can close it from here. If they ask you to open a database, then you can go to File, and then you can choose to open a database.